Hi, my name is Michael Chikeen. The smartest people I've met have one common belief, that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to No More, No Less. I'm your host, Michael Chikeen, and today in the virtual studio, I have with me Seth Nelson. Seth is a Florida-based family attorney known for finding clever solutions to difficult problems. After law school, Seth found he could do the greatest good by helping people through one of the most difficult times of their lives. Being a divorcee himself, as well as a father, he understands how multifaceted divorces can be. And Seth wanted to continue helping people outside of his own jurisdiction, so he just started up his own podcast called How to Split a Toaster, a divorce podcast about saving your relationship. So, without further ado, let's dive into everything divorce. Seth, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Now, I guess I'd like to just start at the beginning, because how does someone decide that their specialty will be in divorce law? Like, do you know that going into law school, or how do you find your way knowing that this is your calling?
Yeah, well, I did not know that going into law school. Some people do. Law school is different than, let's say, medical school. In medical school, you do rotations, so you really get a feel of what it's like to go into pediatrics or into surgery or into pulmonology, whatever the case may be. In law, you just take a bunch of classes. In 3 years, you're done. So a lot of people find their way, and their big division is, do you want to be in the courtroom, i.e. litigation, or do you want to stay out of the courtroom, i.e. be a transactional lawyer? So that's the big kind of divide.
Right.
I always wanted to be in the courtroom, so you can go to the state attorney's office, you could be a public defender, you could be a prosecutor with the state attorney, you can go into criminal defense, you can go into litigation at big firms with civil disputes. I didn't find any of those particularly appealing. I wanted to help people more on an individual basis as opposed to a big corporate entity.
Right.
I didn't want to deal with the criminal side of the law. Those are really bad people behaving very well. Instead, I chose family law, where it's really good people behaving very poorly. Okay? But one of the reasons I chose it, frankly, is because it could help people on an individual basis. I could get into court. I could come up with hopefully creative solutions to solve problems.
Right.
And from a business perspective, people know that they need a lawyer if they're going through a divorce. If the other side's going to lawyer up, you're probably going to lawyer up.
Right. That's really interesting, and I really like that that turn of phrase about, like, these are just good people that in relationships, as I think anyone can relate to, like, you're with someone, for so long, especially in a marriage, through all of these difficult things, kids and whatnot, that I think your brain kind of gets fried in a bad relationship. Like, I think, do you have scenarios where people come to you and, like, you can tell they're actually looking to make an amicable split, but things go haywire anyways?
Yeah, it happens every day. People will call and say that they want an amicable divorce, and I said, that's great. I can get your case done in about 5 minutes. And they're like, what? And I said, all we need to do is accept the other side's offer. Well, I don't want to do that because he wants to keep the house and have the kids more, and I have to pay alimony. I'm like, well, there's the rub, right?
Right.
You say you want an amicable, which is great, as long as you both can agree. But the problem is, in any negotiations, there's always power dynamics. And in a divorce, you just don't know where those power dynamics lie from a history of a relationship that was very intimate at times, and the financial power, the psychological control people have placed over each other. Sometimes, unfortunately, there's physical abuse, which is another form of power. So that's what can make it very complicated in trying to resolve cases.
Right. And what would you say to people that would say, well, sometimes lawyers make things worse, and if there was no lawyers, then people would find a find a result, an amicable way to make things on their own. Like obviously that's quite reductive
Right.
for
Well,
for how relationships work. I'd love to hear your opinion on that perspective.
I agree with the first part of your statement. Sometimes lawyers do make things worse.
Right.
If you asked around Hillsborough County, where I do a majority of my practice, I practice all over the state of Florida. A majority of it's in Hillsborough County and Tampa Bay area and the surrounding counties. We all know who the bad lawyers are. We all know the lawyers that are going to run up a bill and create conflict and not try to settle. It's no surprise. The lawyers know it. The judges know it. The community, if they've been around divorce enough, they'll start talking and they'll know. But when you're looking for a lawyer, it's really hard to know if you're getting one that's going to help solve problems or help really create problems.
Wow. And how have you seen some of these more, I guess, nefarious lawyers create problems? Like what are things people should be aware of when looking for a divorce attorney?
You should, when you have your initial consultation, you should have a list of questions that you want answered. Part of those questions, and you want that lawyer to do the majority of the talking, because if you just call and tell your story, you don't know how they practice law. You don't know how they're going to deal with you. You don't know whether they're just telling you what you want to hear. So the first thing I would ask them is, tell me what the process is of divorce and any substantive issues I might have to deal with. Let them explain Divorce 101 to you. They should be asking you some questions along the way, like, for example, parenting plan. Do you have any kids? If so, how many? How old are they? Are there any special needs? What do we need to know? What has been historically the parental roles in the marriage? And there's, in Florida, there are like 20 some odd factors that the court considers in determining what's best interest of the child. Just recently in Florida, they passed a statute, which is now law, that is, or passed a bill that is now law, that is a presumption of 50-50 time sharing. Judges all over the state are looking at that differently. Some judges are like, yep, 50-50, unless it's really bad, or, alcohol, addiction, location, just can't get the kids back and forth.
Right.
But other than that, don't come to me about putting them to bed later, feeding them ice cream for breakfast, right?
Right.
But when you're talking to the lawyer on that first consultation, how do you handle cases? Do you get along with opposing counsel if you know it? What is your reputation? How much do you think this will cost? And all lawyers will tell you, well, I don't know, because is the other side going to cause problems? The more litigation, the more fighting, the more, is a problem. You do not necessarily want an aggressive lawyer.
Yeah.
You want an effective lawyer. And a lawyer that's going to be aggressive and run up a bill is going to argue over everything, like, what date are we going to take depositions? You can argue about that and run up a bill just trying to clear a date. Right? It's just ridiculous. So there's things like that you need to be careful for.
Right. I guess from your end, how do you deal with clients where, let's say, that they're being completely unreasonable, or maybe they're just an asshole? Like how do you, as an attorney, because obviously you're there to represent them and you're trying to do your best, put your best foot forward for that client, but on some level, has it just become difficult? Like, yeah. I just can't wait until this jerk, or man or woman, is out of my office, because they're trying to ruin the other person's life.
Yeah. So I deal with that very simply. Is I will tell them, this is my advice and counsel. They're not taking it, right? If they're battling with me,
right,
then I'll tell them, why are you paying me $500 an hour not to take my advice? I guess you don't really need me as your lawyer. And then they start changing their tune. Or I will explain to them and I will write them a letter, which is really two things. It is a CYA letter for me in the file, telling them, here's the issues. Here's my advice and counsel. Here's the information I have.
What's a CYA?
Cover your ass.
All right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and the other way is when you put it in a letter to a client and you make them sign it saying they're not taking your advice, they take that more seriously than a phone call or a quick email. So a lot of that is laying it out for them and having them put a pen to the paper and sign, I am not taking your advice. okay, I'll still go to court as long as it's not frivolous or totally unreasonable.
Right.
But if there is a legitimate legal dispute and I have legitimate questions of fact that I can go to court and not bring a frivolous motion or argument, I'll go argue it. And I will have signed, you would have signed the letter that I should not be going to court on this stuff. And the judges know how I litigate cases. So if I'm there on what would be an unreasonable position, or the judge knows it's not me,
Huh.
right? They already know. Now, they might not know whether it's the other client, because it could be the other client,
Right.
but, that's how it happens.
Gotcha. And I guess like because you've been practicing law for how long now in family law?
Nonstop for the last 16 years.
Wow. It's a pretty good track record. And I guess so what would just from from your experience, from your clients, your practice, and maybe colleagues in the area, aside from things that are egregious like physical or emotional abuse, all of those things that are pretty cut and dry that someone wants to get a divorce, what reasons are you seeing for most people coming to the realization that their marriage is over?
It's going to be oversimplified. It's just communication.
Right.
And it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Huh.
If you take, like you said, all those big things aside, married couples really don't do things to purposely hurt the other person. Now, that doesn't mean that you haven't been hurt by your spouse. Of course you have. They've said something, they did something, or they didn't do something that you thought they should have done. So the real trick in a relationship is when that happens in real time, you have to stop and say, this is what I heard you say, or this is how I felt when you did X. It's not about them. It's about how you felt. And so when you can say it that way, like, I just heard you say this and this is how it made me feel, did I hear that right? And I will share with you, when I say that to my wife, she's like, oh my God, that's not what I meant at all.
Right.
Right? And then she'll make a joke and say, I meant it even worse. And then I start laughing. Right? But to be able to communicate about that in real time, and also to be partners in the relationship, and to make sure the other party knows what you're bringing to the relationship, and to understand what they're bringing to the relationship. So I cannot tell you how many people have walked into my office and said, I've been raising the kids for 12 years. I have no idea what our financial picture looks like. I swiped the credit card. It's never got declined. I'm assuming they're being paid. Right? So you need to be able to sit down with your spouse once a month and say, where are we on our bills? Where are we on, the mortgage? How much do we have in investments? How much money do you make? Where's it coming? I want to be able to see the checkbook and talk about it.
Right.
People just don't do that because they get busy raising the kids and the other person's bringing home the money, or you're both working and you're both sharing in those responsibilities.
Yeah.
But typically, people tend to fall into patterns on what they do in the relationship. You guys need to have those conversations.
Wow. Wait, and you even said something earlier in that answer, that no spouse specifically is trying to hurt the other person. Did I phrase that correctly?
Yeah.
And
Very
that
rarely.
itself seems like pretty revolutionary, because I would assume at the end stage of a relationship, there's so much contempt that's built in that you would think some people are specifically trying to hurt the other person.
At the end stage, sure. Once you hire the lawyers, they'll be like, I want to burn it to the ground. I want them to suffer. But you asked me, how do they get to my office, right?
Right.
They get to my lack of communication, lack of transparency. Now, look, some people just grow apart, but part of that's communication. Some people, they have a very difficult time dealing with a situation. God forbid this happens to any of our listeners, but death of a child, right? That's just hard to get over, okay?
Right.
having a special needs child can be very stressful on relationships. Just because it takes so much time, and you're going to the doctors and you're doing the best you can, and how you deal with it can be different and create conflict between parents. So there's a lot to this. But I think early in a relationship or through the years, people aren't intentionally trying to hurt the other.
Right.
Boy, there's a lot of hurt in a lot of relationships.
For sure. But that I like that. I was going to say that's a generous way to look at it. But, I like that to also be the truth, that people are really just doing their best. And unfortunately, because let's say how they were raised or what relationships they were exposed to in their life, that maybe they don't know how to properly love someone or themselves, and they just end up in relationships that, aren't so helpful.
And that's the other key, and this is why it's such a balance. I'm talking about how you have to have a relationship and communicate and know what the other one is doing. You also have to have your separate lives and come together on stuff that's important. So what happens in relationships is either they're both living their separate life, they don't really have a bond anymore, or they have a bond, but you lose your identity. And on my podcast, I've spoken freely about this. When I was married the first time, I lost my identity, and it was not anything at all that my spouse did. It was all self-induced pressure. I became a husband for the first time. I became a stepfather right away. I became a father. I was a provider. I felt like I always had to be there for her and the kids. And I just never had time to go hang out with the guys or watch the game or play poker or go sailing or golf or whatever people like to do.
Right.
Now, let me be very clear. She never once said, no, you can't go do that. But I felt such an obligation to be present every day that I really lost who I was. And then that causes conflict in the relationship because I didn't communicate that I needed some me time.
Right. Did you know in those moments that you did need some me time, or you didn't even realize that that it was an issue?
Didn't even realize it.
That's really interesting.
My chest was tight. I was stressed. And my current spouse, when we were dating, and we dated a long time, and she met my former spouse because we were going to a play that my son was in, and he was in grade school at the time, a little kid, and eventually she asked me, what went wrong between you two? Because she's great. Your former spouse is wonderful. She's smart. She's funny. She's pretty. And the whole deal. And I said, how I feel how I act when my chest gets tight? And she's like, yeah, you're miserable when your chest gets tight. And I get stressed. I'm like, I was like that for 3 years. She's like, oh my God. She had so much patience. I wouldn't have put up with that for 2 weeks.
It's great that you guys are able to have those conversations and grow like that. And maybe another time I'd like to talk to you more about men, because I'm currently researching to write a nonfiction book about men, and basically how, as boys, we kind of the humanity's taken from us because we're not allowed to act like a girl or act like we're gay, and so you kind of lose your ability to be sad. You lose your ability to love fully, to give love fully. And I see a lot of men, I think around 30 and onwards, that if you're dampening the love and the vulnerability parts, you're not really sure why you're feeling what you're feeling. You're so disconnected from your body. And so even now that you're in a relationship that seems, from what you're saying, seems great, are you able to better identify okay, my chest is getting tight. This means X, and then you can solve for it, or is this still something that is a work in progress?
No,
as we all are
on my own. We're always a work in progress. I got other stuff I have to fix now, but
right.
that I'm working on really well. No, I think your point about how boys are raised differently than girls is one well taken. We've all heard the saying, well, man up.
Right.
Man up. Well, I mean, what does that mean? That means just do what you got to do. Don't worry about the emotion of it. But I think today in the divorce world, for support on podcasts and books, there is a huge community of women helping women.
Right.
almost no guys are in that conversation, right?
For men getting divorced?
Men getting divorced or dealing with divorce afterwards.
What?
There is a huge, huge population of women helping women get through these difficult times. There's very few male voices out there.
Actually, you know what? And I don't have a lot of examples of this from my friends, but one friend who's recently, I think, separated. I don't believe they've gone towards divorce yet, but he said now that other people that he knows that divorced before are starting to reach out to him. He realizes when they got divorced, he wasn't reaching out to them.
Yeah.
And he says a lot of men are like that. They see a guy who's getting divorced and they're like, I don't want to catch whatever the fuck he has.
Oh, 100%. And actually, divorce comes in clusters.
Right. Oh, women for sure.
Clusters of friends is where divorce happens. And that's just statistically proven. But to your point about not reaching out, people do not get it unless they've been through it. They really don't. And they'll try to reach out. And they might try to be helpful. But
right.
They just don't know what to do. And
but what about, so why are so many women, because you said they don't know what to do, so they don't know how to reach out. And I think you're speaking specifically for men, right?
Well, I think anyone. Like, I think if your girlfriend is getting divorced and you've never been divorced,
yeah,
you might do the best you can to help out and give all this advice and listen and do girls' night. And all that shit you're doing might not actually be helpful. Some of it might. But
right.
then if you unfortunately have to go through divorce, you're going to be like, oh my God, none of that helped. That isn't what they needed. And
right.
You know, and so
but like you're saying in the like the podcast social media space, most outlets are mostly geared towards women.
Yeah, 100%.
See, and I've even seen statistics that women will often call for divorce more often than men, and obviously people are interpreting like, interpreting, I got that word, interpreting that it's because men are so much more difficult to be in relations with. And I would argue, I'd say people are still 50-50 because relationships, like you said, are just difficult. But I think a lot of men are taught to like just continue to bear down, like close off your emotions even more and just deal with it until you have a really bad drinking problem. Whereas I think women are more attached to their emotions sooner so they can realize, oh, this situation is so bad and toxic for me. I finally need to get out. And that's a testament to women that I wish more men had to realize when they were feeling more miserable.
It's a change in society and economics. For a long time, women stayed married because they couldn't afford to do anything else.
Right.
Right now, women have their own careers. They have their own income streams. They have their own wealth, which makes getting divorced easier than not having anything. The people that are most frightened when they come in my office, and this can be either men or women, but the spouse that stayed home, raised the kids, never finished college, doesn't have a career, and has no idea how to work the finances, and has been living this very lovely life, right?
I have heard that from women in my life that have gotten divorced, and they didn't realize how scared they were until they started going through it and being like, well, we went from high school to university to jobs and living together, and they had no idea how to operate their own life without the input of a spouse or a child and things like that.
I think being on your own is an important skill set to learn.
Right. And are there since we are talking about maybe the differences in genders in a certain respect, what I guess is there anything you can point to that you see that when a man is going to come into your office and file for divorce, or when a woman's going to come into your office, are there any fundamental differences you're seeing, or is it kind of a cluster of the same things?
It's a cluster of the same emotions. It's more the dynamics of the relationship, about how that client perceives the kids being treated by the other parent. It doesn't have to be true, it's just their perception. That client's perspective of how money is handled and what they've been through. But at the end of the day, what people don't realize, it's not about you, and it's not about them, and it's not about your arguments. It's about what's a parenting plan and best for the kids, How are you going to divide up your assets and debts? In Florida, that's called equitable distribution. What, if any, money is getting paid from one spouse to the other during the pendency of the case or afterwards? That's called alimony. How much is child support and who owes whom, how much, and for how long?
Right.
And then the process and attorney's fees. So there's a lot of things you can argue about in a divorce.
Right.
And, I always have clients come in, and this is what you should be listening for your lawyer to ask you on that first consultation. What are your goals? If I could wave the magic wand and get you what you want out of this divorce, what is that? That's a way of asking what's most important to you. And what will happen is you get 6 months into it, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, 18 months, and you're in a settlement, you're in a mediation, and you're going to settle. And let's say I get my client what I perceive is to be a fair, and I put fair in quotes, but a good offer. What I mean by that is it might happen in court, but we can get it now, so why go to court?
Right.
And then they keep reaching for more, and they keep reaching for more, and they keep reaching for more. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Originally, you told me here were your top 5 goals and priorities in this order. We've achieved those, and now we're on number 7, 8, and 9, and you keep pushing. Why are you going to lose this deal when you're on number 9 or 10 now? Right? Stay focused on what your ultimate goals were, and are those goals achievable through the process or through the legal system? Because some people have a goal that I'll say, look, you're not getting that unless the other side agrees. So, for example, in Florida, the goal might be, I want dad to pay for the kids' college. I said, I don't get that unless it's by agreement, because the Florida courts do not have the power to order that to happen. So I just can't do that for you. I'm sorry. Let's move on to the next one.
Right. Oh man, like even just thinking about all the things that they could that they could argue, because it's even in like, I had a business partner for a business that was going really well several years ago, but we decided, he and I were bickering just way too much, and so we decided we need to figure out who's going to buy who out. And I consulted a cousin of mine who went through a buyout and a sale a few years prior, and he was saying, he's like, listen, anyone that goes through this, even if you guys are buddies and you want a fair deal, he goes, I've seen like the closest of family members go into this sort of negotiation, and it turns into like they were strangers.
Yep.
And I saw that happen with that. Luckily, he and I are friends again now. But during that negotiation process, it was really frustrating, and we became kind of really combative for how we're even communicating over email. And I don't think either of us, especially me, I did not expect things like that. So I can only imagine in a divorce where like the emotional stakes are so much higher, like the wounds are so much deeper, that do you see some people that like come to the table, like you said, like and they're trying to have things amicable, and then 3 questions in from the other partner, and they're like, I'm gonna bury this person.
That's right. And also, you have to remember, they're going through a grieving process. So there's the emotional divorce and the legal divorce. And I can promise you this, you will never get over the emotional divorce. That will never end until at least the legal divorce ends. The legal divorce has to end before you can get over the emotional divorce. It still might take a year or 2 or 3 or 5. It depends on how much you hold on to that hate and anger. Right? It matters whether you can set your differences aside and save your former spouse's seat at your kid's play. Right? And, oh, wait, save 2 seats because she's bringing her boyfriend. Right? And I will share this with you. My current wife, when we were first dating, she asked me, well, what do you think about that guy that your ex-wife is dating? And I said, you can never have too many people that love your kid. And I trusted my former spouse, because I say former, I think ex is derogatory. So I trusted my former spouse that she's only going to bring guys around that are going to treat the kids well. And you can't have too many people that love your kids. So I hope it's a long-term relationship. You don't want to see the revolving door because that's more loss for children. There's no
Right.
stability, but
Seth, I don't know if you've just done a lot of therapy or you were born like this, but that is such a great way to look at things, especially because I've seen women and men who have to deal with new partners coming in who are some are better than others, as you would imagine. But that's such a great way to look at that. Like, it takes a village. And if you
yeah.
have one other person that could be like a positive influence in your child's life, like that's it seems like a win. But most people would not look at it like that, I don't think.
And it does matter who that other person is. If they are insecure and now they come into the relationship and they want to exert their authority and be like, "Oh, it's my house, my rules, your kids, I don't care." Yeah, that's a problem,
Right.
right? But if they know what their role is, and people say, "Well, what's their role?" I said, "It's just to be a role model.
Yeah.
That's your role. If you're there, kids are looking about what you do, you know?" So, yeah, it can be difficult. Sometimes if you're not getting along with your former spouse and they start dating somebody, that somebody might be your best friend and you don't know it. They might be talking your former spouse off the ledge and saying, "Look, it's not that big of a deal. Like,
Right.
you and I will get in the car and go drive and pick up the kids. It's more time in the car with the kids. I know we shouldn't have to do the driving all the time, but let's do it. I'll spend time with you in the car." Right. There's always
Right.
a way to rephrase or look at the situation in a different way and find a positive.
Right. And on the flip side, if your former partner starts dating someone who has this real like negative, toxic sort of mindset, that can just create a heap of shit in your world as well, I would imagine.
100%. And that's where the problems arise. Like, sometimes people are getting along great, and then here comes a new person in the equation. I call them ghost people. They're around, but you don't see them.
Right.
But
Haunting your relationships.
if you have a good relationship with your former spouse, sometimes you can say, "Look, do me a favor. Just, when we're together, don't say this or don't say that, because you're just causing problems for me in my relationship. It shouldn't be this way, but there's a lot of other things in this relationship that are really positive. She's just insecure about you, or he's just insecure about you." Right? Like,
Right.
whatever it is, I'm not saying one person or the other, but if you can have that conversation, and then hopefully your former spouse is going to respect that. I'm like, "I don't want to cause problems for you. Like, it shouldn't
Yeah.
be this way, but thanks for being open, honest, and vulnerable with me." And really, Michael, I think that's the key. When you can be open, honest, and vulnerable in conversations, those are the best conversations.
Yeah,
Right?
that seems like a good recipe to avoid divorce. As on top of that, have you ever seen people that come to your office wanting a divorce, and somehow you're able to talk them off the ledge, so to speak, and or once they reach your office, it's kind of a done deal.
Usually once they reach my office, it's kind of a done deal. But yeah, have I represented clients that have ultimately stayed married? Answer is yes. One way I've done that, or I've helped facilitate that, is their big argument was money.
Hmm.
There's a big power dynamic with the money. We negotiate a postnuptial agreement. The wife was staying home, raising the children. We said, "Okay, husband's going to put so much away into an IRA every year, so much into a 401k, give you spending money like an allowance, right? This is what we're going to do if you guys get divorced." And it solved the majority of their money problems.
Which
Because
solved the relationship
which
as well.
solved the stress of the relationship, and solved the stress of when someone got mad at the other one and said, "I'm going to kick you out. This is my house. I'm going to leave you on the street." That's scary to people, right?
Right. Sure.
But when you negotiate a post-nup and say, "Well, I actually have 90 days to move out, and you've got to write me a check before I move out," right? Like, that changes the dynamic. And
Right.
it allowed them to focus on their relationship. And I haven't, I've done this more than once with clients, so I don't, really follow whether they're still married today. I would imagine if they got divorced, they would have come back and seen me, but I
Right.
haven't seen them, which is a good thing.
That's really interesting because, like, yeah, because I guess fear if there's too much of that ingredient in any relationship, it can kind of start to poison the well in a pretty profound way. So even if the relationship itself, from what you're saying, is, reasonably healthy and these people love each other, but the wife is kind of terrified that, like, if this ends, I'm completely fucked because I've been raising these kids. I have, let's say, if they didn't go to school, or, I have no skills, and what am I going to do? Then that fear trickles into every other aspect of the relationship. Is that accurate?
100%. It's like when you get in a fight and you say things that you don't mean because you're reacting and you're not thinking things through. But those sting and those hurt. Right? I'm going to leave you penniless. Well, you're supposed to love me. We're supposed to be raising this child together, and you're going to get divorced and leave me penniless? How am I going to care for our child?
Right.
Like, that just causes some doubts, causes a breakdown in the relationship.
Right. And I'm curious about because obviously I've probably heard more perspectives from men that are getting divorced. Some have had good divorces, some have had nightmare city sort of divorces. But, and there's been scenarios where we'll have negotiated like a child support alimony sort of situation. And then after even so many years, his former partner would refuse to work, and she would take him back to court to try to get more money to garnish more of his wages. Like, how is those situations even legal? Like, and this guy's one of the nicest guys I've known, and he was going through this, trying to do his best to pay for his kids and all these things, and
right.
like his former partner was just trying to make his life worse so that she didn't have to live hers. Like, and
yeah, so you ask a great question. How is that even legal? It depends on the state. So
right.
in Florida, there's now, as of July 1st, 2023, there's more of a formula for the most money a spouse would have to pay. And also the formula says for the most length of time you have to pay. So
Right.
that helps solve that problem somewhat. Also in Florida, when a spouse receives alimony, former spouse, that's supposed to meet their needs. So for them to come back and say they need more, why do you need more? Right? If you were
Right.
imputed an income of making $50,000 a year, and that you went to trial and the judge said, I know you're not working now, but you can get a job making 50 grand, so I'm going to act like you have 50 grand. Unless you've gotten injured or there's been a medical issue, you should still be able to make 50 grand 5 years later. You don't get to come back and relitigate that issue, right?
Right.
And in Florida, like inflation alone, there's some nuance to this, so don't take it as in written in stone. But just because inflation goes up doesn't mean you can get more alimony and come back.
Right.
So I tell everybody, the best thing you can do financially is to be as self-sufficient financially as possible.
Right.
Because if I get you an alimony award in court, that's just a piece of paper saying he has to pay. What happens if he doesn't?
Oh, that's
calling
interesting.
me back, right?
Right.
So a lot of lawyers will say, oh, don't get a job. We can get more alimony, And I'm like, go get a job. One, you're going to feel good about yourself. It will give you something to do.
Jesus.
You want to get back into the workforce now and not wait 3 years down the road because you need to start earning income.
But
right?
some lawyers are giving the advice, don't get a job. I can get more money from your
all
former
the
spouse.
time.
That is gross.
Yeah, all the time.
Oh, my gosh.
And I'll have other clients, let's say the wage earner will say, Seth, I own my own business, and I can kind of turn on the spigot or turn it off. So maybe I'll kind of like play it cool here and not earn as much. I'm like, they never take all of it. It's not like you pay every dollar to her. So why wouldn't you want to earn more money? That's crazy to me. Go earn your money. Build your business. Right? You do good work. You're building your business. You have more sales. You have more customers. You get more referrals. So you're playing the short game of, I don't want to earn a lot in the next year or two. I'm going through divorce. But that puts you a year or two behind in growing your business.
Right.
So play the long game.
What mental RAM that must take up in anyone's head, and one spouse trying to think of all the, okay, how do I get this or how do I avoid this? Like that just sounds like a, emotional gasoline on top of a already,
Oh,
fiery sort of
it's a
situation.
nightmare. It's a nightmare. And that's why I tell people I can get you through this divorce. I can only go as fast as the slowest person or entity.
Yeah,
So
right.
right now in Hillsborough County for a 2-day trial in front of a judge, it's October 12th. We did not get trial dates. And this is everybody. I'm not talking about a specific case, but you can't get trial dates till the end of January, into February.
Yikes.
So if I'm ready to go to trial now, I am not getting to trial for another 4 months.
Right.
So,
Oh man, that definitely makes things even more frustrating to sit there and wait. Right? It's like being in traffic to get divorced. That's the worst. Is there anything like do you have any like anecdotes, like ridiculous stories that you'd be able to share from like because I don't know, obviously you can't divulge names or things like that, but things that maybe people would be shocked to hear.
and I mean, everyone says, what's the most shocking thing you've ever had to deal with in divorce court? And I'm like, it's like a typical Tuesday. I mean,
Oh my
there's,
God.
there isn't one thing. Anything from, the standard stuff, people hiding money, right?
Right.
People having affairs. The horrible stuff is domestic violence, addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction,
Yeah.
child abuse. I mean, that's horrible. Never fun to deal with as a lawyer, as a judge, as the people involved. It's just terrible. You have people will argue over items, personal property items, that cost less to replace than it does to pay me to argue about them. So do not pay your lawyer thousands of dollars to argue over the
A
personal
blender.
property in the house. Or as I say in How to Split a Toaster, do not argue over the toaster. Go buy a new one.
Right.
And that's where a lot of money can get wasted. And what you have to do is tell them very early on, get your list. Are there certain things that are important to you?
Right.
And literally, this is I don't want to say trick of the trade, but a process that I go through because I've mediated as well thousands of cases. And when it came to personal property, I would have, let's just say, the wife make a list. There would be a list of everything in the house. And I would take the paper to the wife and I'd say, highlight everything you want with this pink highlighter. And to the husband in another room, highlight everything you want in this blue highlighter. Because now they're picking what they want. They're not saying, I want it, then the other side says, well, I want it too. Right?
Right.
And then I took the list and I said, okay, there's 100 items on this list, let's say. 25 items are blue alone. Husband, you get them. The wife did not put them in pink. 25 items are pink alone. Boom. Done. Wife, you get those. There's 25 items that are both blue and pink. So I've highlighted those in yellow because we have to discuss those. I said there's 25 items highlighted in green. And they say, well, what's the green? I'm like, the green means it's my shit now because neither one of you want it. But let me tell you, if one of them would have said they wanted it, now we're going to have a problem.
Right. That's so, and do you have to go back and give them a list to be like, okay,
Yeah.
here are the green items. Can you guys figure this out?
I'm like, do what you want with them. No one wants them. Like, they're not on your list. So don't argue about it now.
Right. Yeah. 'Cause I guess like, do you have days sometimes where like you just can't believe how petty some people can be?
That would what we would call a Wednesday. Yes, every day. But we work hard with our clients to say, I know this feels like you're being taken advantage of. I appreciate, and actually never tell someone I know how they feel or I understand. I just tell them I appreciate it. Because
Right.
no, you don't. Well, okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate that this feels like you're being taken advantage of. The question is, Do you want to fight about it, or do you want to let it go? What's more important to you?
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, you can either be right or you can settle your case. You can't be both, because we will be dealing with a problem in the other room, and our client, my client, our firm's client, me, we will be coming up with all these very rational solutions. Well, we can do this or we can do that, or there's different ways to divide this up. And they're all very well thought out. They're all very streamlined. There's steps to them. What, if thens, if this happens, then that happens. We get it all done. The other side says no and comes up with something crazy. And my client's very frustrated. I said, well, here's the problem. You and I are trying to put a rational solution together for an irrational problem.
Right.
So let's just stop. Let's just hear what they have to say and come up with an idea. But do you really want to fight about this? Is this really worth, like you said, all the brain matter it's taken to, and space in your head to deal with this? I've talked to people. I've seen them a year after their divorce, 2 years after their divorce. And if they're doing it right, they're not talking about their spouse. And if they are, it's like, yeah, they're still kind of a pain, but whatever, I'm used to it.
Yeah.
And they're usually telling me about, dating sucks, or, oh my God, dating's great, or, oh, I found somebody, or,
Right.
I've recouped the money that I had to pay out, like whatever the case may be. That's where you want to be.
Right. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, because few things are as important as, perhaps some sort of the funds that you're going to come out of it that maybe you are rightly owed, and also custodying your kids and how that's going to be moving forward. Like if you're arguing about a 65-inch TV, like you're out of your mind. But
Yeah.
so I can imagine the patience you've had to cultivate over the years to deal with those situations, and even the empathy to realize like this person, maybe they are terrible, but like most people I would imagine are not terrible. They're just like super disappointed and sad that this relationship is over, and now they have to figure out how to get out of it.
Right. Let's talk about parenting for a second. So now in Florida, there's this new presumption for 50-50. But prior to that, and judges are handling it differently across the state, but prior to that, there was no presumption. So I would go to court, and there's 20 different factors, and you prove all this stuff, and the court says, well, the father wins on this factor, the mother wins on this factor is not relevant to this case. Let's say there was no drug addiction or alcohol. Great. There's no substance abuse. No one was talking about the litigation with the kids, all these problems, right?
Right.
So let's say it's a little bit more favorable to mom. Okay? So dad's going to get every other weekend, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. Dad's going to get every Wednesday night. Mom's going to get every other weekend, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. She's going to get every Tuesday night. Court's like, and I'm going to give mom every Monday night. So right now, mom only has one more day a week than dad. They're equal on the weekends. Dad has Wednesday. Mom has Tuesday. Right now it's 50-50, but we gave mom Monday. There's only one more day in the week that we're arguing about. It's called Thursday. How much money do you want to argue about Thursday overnight? And if you really want to drill down on it, you pick the kids up from school earliest at 3 if you can get off work, but usually they're in aftercare, so it's around 6. They're going to bed by 8:30 or 9, so you're arguing over 3 hours every week, and tack on an hour in the morning, getting them up and getting them to school. You're arguing about 4 hours a week.
Right.
Do you really want to do that? And the judge might say, I'll give the father every other Thursday. So now you're arguing over 4 hours every 2 weeks.
Right.
How much money do you want to spend doing that? Now, I will share with you in my parenting plan that we used since my son was 2.5 until he was about 15 or 16. That's when COVID hit and we changed it. I did not have him 50% of the time. If I did the math only because I'm a divorce lawyer, it was about 43% of the time. If you can't have the relationship that you want to have with your kid for the long haul, so he comes to you in good times and bad when he's 2, 12, 22, and 32, if you can't get that done with 40 or 43% of the time, the extra 7 or 10% is not going to help.
Very interesting.
What are you arguing about? And we can do these parenting plans all day long. And ultimately, I will tell you, they do not matter. What matters is how the parents get along.
Huh.
Because if you have a parenting plan that's perfect, but it is not implemented well, it's implemented with conflict, doesn't matter what it says. If
Right.
it's a bad plan, but the parents are flexible and they work together and they kind of figure it out as they go along and there's no conflict, that's better for kids.
It's funny, actually. I have an interesting question for you because I'm only now seeing these things play out as more friends are getting divorced and
Sure.
and things like that. And I've only have one. So I have a cousin in Italy actually, and he's recently separated, and they've decided that the kids will stay in the same house all the time, and the mother and father are the ones that come in and out interchangeably because they didn't want the kids to have to move around.
Right.
And for the first time, I thought about like how awful that must be in every other divorce where the kid 1 week here, 1 week there, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, have to go into like a different bedroom with a different bed to sleep in. And then like, it must feel so destabilizing. Like, do you have any other couples that have ever had one residence for the kid and they go back and forth, or is that just completely logistically impossible?
Well, I haven't had it on a final judgment getting divorced. We've certainly used that technique during the divorce, and that's actually called nesting. There's
Okay.
a term for it. They're nesting, right? The kids
Right.
stay in the nest, the parents come and go. Okay. The problem is once you get divorced, and kudos to your cousin and his spouse, because if they can do that for the kids and not have conflict, that's a great solution, right?
Right.
But the problem is you're in each other's space,
Yeah.
right? So, maybe you don't clean up when you leave.
Right.
And now they're clean. Like, there's a lot of potential conflict. So I think it's better to have different spaces. But to your point alone about, well, how is it for kids? They go into a different bed. This is an exact example that I give. Go sleep in a hotel room. It's different. Your
Yeah.
kid is doing that every 2 days, every 3 days, every week. So why don't we do, and we actually had a podcast with Jamie Finley, who's an interior designer, about setting up rooms for kids in space when you get divorced. One of the suggestions, buy the same mattress and buy the same pillows, buy the same sheets.
I knew it. See, I was saying, I was having this conversation not too long ago, and they're like, Mike, you're nuts," and I'm like, no, like, because I've had times where I had issues with like mattresses, and I was sleeping in different places because I was traveling. It makes a gigantic difference.
Yep.
And if every 2 days you have a different bed, your body doesn't know where the fuck you are.
Right.
Not to mention a different pillow. Obviously, that to me that seemed like elementary, dear Watson.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
a different pillow is crucial.
But here's
yeah.
the problem. I don't want to spend that much money on a mattress.
Right.
That pillow's too expensive. Those sheets are outrageously expensive.
It's funny. Everything you're saying, all I'm hearing is that like any time that there's a potential for conflict between former spouses, there's going to be conflict because you're taking two people who, from what you've said, like the most common reason they file for divorce is communication problems, but then they have to communicate to get through a divorce, and then they have to communicate for the, like, it's like the main thing that they can't do, they have to do.
That's right.
Moving forward.
And then there's no real incentive, personally, other than to not be in conflict and to help your kid, which should be plenty, right?
Yeah.
But if you're in a relationship and you have an issue with your spouse, guess what? You're going to work it through because you have a common bond of having this relationship that you want to keep going on in life.
Right.
Right? You kind of pick your battles, and we all joke about, like, I leave drawers open. I don't know why, man. I, like, open up. I take a spoon out. I'm making my wife coffee, and she comes back, and, like, the drawer's open. I don't know why I don't close these drawers, okay?
That is hilarious.
And,
like that's just
about it.
that's just my thing. I'm the drawers open guy.
And literally she'll say, and she'll joke about it, and I laugh and I go, shut it. I don't know what I'm doing. But but imagine if you're like nesting and you come back and all the frickin' drawers are open. And that fucking sucks. Like, you're going to be annoyed. So, but there's a reason. Like, and so once you get divorced, it's hard because you don't have that relationship anymore to like get through it together.
Yeah.
it's all about preventing conflict. Now, look, it takes two. I'm very fortunate. My former spouse is amazing. Our kid is amazing. He's well adjusted. But you also can't complain when your kid, when you've done everything you can to make the divorce as best as you can make it, because it's not their fault, when they're like, I just hate it. I have to take my stuff back and forth. Like, you can't be like, I've done everything to make your, like, yeah, it sucks, dude. Like, my son just went off to college, and we joked that it was the great consolidation. Like, he got to bring all the shit that he wanted to be in one place, right? Now, there's still stuff at my house and at his mom's house.
Right.
But, you know, it's just
Actually,
the way it
I'm
is.
curious. Have you spoken to how long has your son been away at school? Did he just go?
He's a freshman.
Okay.
Yeah, so he went up in late August, and here we are in October.
Oh, that's exciting. Congrats.
Yeah, thanks. We're going up for Parents' Weekend soon. So
Because I'm wondering how children of divorce that have been going back and forth for X amount of years, like if when they move away to university and they can sleep in the same bed in perpetuity, I wonder if something changes in their brain. I wonder if they're able to, like, if something calms in them because they're not constantly moving. Like, have you spoken with other divorced parents that have experienced that and what their kids have said?
Kids get into their life, right?
Right.
There's certainly a benefit of not going back and forth, but that gets amplified a little bit. Thanksgiving, first holiday home, right?
Right.
So I talked to my former spouse, and she goes, what are you thinking about for Thanksgiving when he comes home? I said, I've told him what my rule is for Thanksgiving, and I can be kind of stern in my voice and harsh sometimes. And she goes, oh, what's that? And I said, the rule is simple. Spend time with mom. Like, your mom is missing you. And my former spouse, of course, appreciated that. Like, I was telling my son, mom is the priority here. It's her favorite holiday. And he's like, well, I'll see you too, Dad. And she's like, you got to see him too. And she invites me to Thanksgiving every year, and everything's fine. But when you come home and you only have 3 days or 4 days or a weekend, and now you got to go to mom's, and now you got to go to dad's, and how much time am I spending at mom's, and how much, like, just fucking get me back to school and let me go hang out with my friends, man. Like, so,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I honestly, I have multiple friends that are children of divorce, and like, honestly, I hope you know what a service you're doing to your kid with how well you and your former spouse are getting along. Because I have friends that live away from home that refuse to even enter the country. Some
I'm
years.
not coming back because I got to decide who I see.
Yeah, and the drama is so ridiculous because the people are still so petty after even 20 years that I'm sure your son's, if not now, then at some point we'd be pretty grateful that you guys are reasonable adults.
He gets it, and
Right.
we did it for him, and like I said, we're very close. And look, I'm very, very fortunate. My former spouse had the same mentality. We realized things didn't work out between us. It wasn't always easy. We gave each other the space. We had boundaries, But literally, my wife and I are going out with her and her husband this evening. We're going to go grab dinner and a drink together because we haven't really seen them as much, and they're great. And the reason we haven't seen them as much is because we would see them at my son's activities.
Right.
Right.
Man, are you an exception to the rule? It sounds like.
Yeah, but part of it too is because I deal with it all day, and this isn't all about what a great parent I am or co-parent. It takes two, but
Right.
I deal with this all day. I don't bring it home with me. I see what my clients do to their kids, and they're not even doing it intentionally. It's emotional. It's difficult, right? People don't intentionally hurt their kids, but there's all this other stuff going on, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. And my current wife, she hates it when I say that she's my current wife because it sounds like she could, in the future, not be my wife.
There's someone else on deck.
That's right. That's right. But literally, she gets along with her former spouse. And people are like, oh, my God, how lucky are you? I said, well, we are lucky. But when I was dating people, if they didn't get along with their former spouse, I'm out. I'm not dealing with that bullshit at home. I deal with that all day.
Right. And do you think that it's because, like, every day at work you're confronted with the ghost of Christmas future?
Yeah.
of saying like what people put their kids through, because
Yeah.
it's almost an hour and I want to be respectful of your time, but I'm gonna imagine people that are listening to this that do have kids and they are divorced or they know they're going to get divorced. Are you able to share some of these stories for what people are doing to their kids through their divorces, and maybe we can scare them straight a little bit as well, because it,
Well,
it must be hard to see.
It's all the stuff you're talking about today, right? Like, does it really matter what day an extracurricular activity is on? Well, I want to take him, or he never takes them. Your
Right.
kid wants to go, right?
Hmm.
Like, just make it work. Like, pick your battles. Oh, I have to do the driving all the time. Sounds like to me you get to spend more time with your kid in the car, right? They're fighting for all this time, but they don't want to do the driving. They're giving you time with the kids. Take it. Well, the driving
Right.
sucks. I get it, but you're with your kid. Take it, right? Like, so there's logistical issues, but really it's about trying to reframe what is happening. Okay? And the things that I know in my life now at, 53, the things I worry about now are not the things I worried about in my 20s and 30s and 40s. Right?
Fair.
You kind of learn. So I try to ask people, like, is this really worth the fight? Is this worth this energy? Right? Is this about you and your relationship or your disappointment that they're not the parent you think they should be? You're not going to make them be a better parent. Stop trying. Right? And your kids will figure it out. So, but
Right.
it's hard. And I'm not saying this is easy. It wasn't always easy for my former spouse and I. We had a period of time after the divorce where we gave each other space. We had boundaries, right? And then just over time, the way we communicated about our child, we became much closer. And I mean, it's just the way it worked, and we're very fortunate. But ultimately, even if you don't have a good relationship with your former spouse, it's really about your relationship with your kid. Don't bash the former spouse. Don't bash their parent, right? There's no reason to say anything bad about that, about their other parent, because the kid's going to make their own determination on whether that parent's a good parent or bad parent. And if you're trying to poison the well and the kid doesn't agree with you, then you're going to be the bad parent in the long run.
Right. Well, I think that's a pretty powerful place to end. But Seth, thank you so much for this conversation and illuminating this space a little bit more for me. And if I have any friends in Florida that go down this road, I'll definitely know where to send them.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you did enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.